My name is Julie Hollis, and I am Secretary General of EuroGeoSurveys, an organisation that represents the Geological Surveys of Europe. And I'd like to talk about EuroGeoSurveys in the context of a future sustainable geological service for Europe to support subsurface planning. As we all know, there is a need to move rapidly away from a dependence on fossil fuels. In Europe, that is driven by the combined pressures of both achieving the goals of the European Green Deal, reaching its ambitions of Fit for 55, which is the goal of reducing emissions by 55% by 2030, and the goal of reaching net zero by 2050. But Europe is also under considerable pressure in responding to geopolitical events, most significantly the Russian war of aggression on Ukraine, including its impacts on European supply chains, impacting energy and raw materials supply. These disruptions to supply chains have highlighted Europe's vulnerability in regard to the resources in the earth beneath our feet. Fossil fuels, yes, but also critical minerals to support our transition to a green energy future. For example, through the raw materials required for the millions of new electric vehicles, for the electricity infrastructure required to support them, for the infrastructure for renewable technologies and production and distribution of green energies from renewable sources, and much more. But the increasing focus on and recognition that the Earth's subsurface is crucial to a sustainable future is not restricted to minerals and energy. It also applies, for example, to groundwater, the largest freshwater resource on the planet, which is under increasing pressure through the impact of fertilizers and pesticides in agriculture, industrial and household contaminants, and overuse creating water shortages, land subsidence, and reduced flow in rivers. In addition, climate change is impacting on coastal erosion, on the nature and frequency of geological hazards, such as landslides, resulting from unusual heavy rain events, and it will continue to impact our cities, which must quickly adapt and dramatically adapt to the requirement to changed energy sources and conflicting land and subsurface use. EuroGeoSurveys is fortunately in exactly the right position to support the dynamic policy environment resulting from these multiple and sometimes conflicting subsurface uses, water, energy, minerals, for example. This is because EuroGeoSurveys is a mature, more than 50 years old organisation representing 37 geological surveys of Europe, surveys that host a huge archive of data and knowledge of the European subsurface. EuroGeoSurveys provides public earth science knowledge to support the EU's competitiveness, social well-being, environmental management, and international commitments. It coordinates the network of the Geological Surveys of Europe, jointly addressing European issues in the field of geoscience and collaborating on projects that directly inform EU, local, and national policy for the benefit of all European citizens. As is the case for ASME, at the heart of EuroGeoSurveys are our expert groups. Hundreds of experts from the Geological Surveys of Europe are engaged in our 10 expert groups and 1 task force, carrying out research that directly tackles diverse societal challenges and helps to build a sustainable future. These expert groups include Earth observation and geohazards, geoenergy, geoheritage, geochemistry, geological mapping and modelling, marine geology, mineral resources, spatial information, urban geology, water resources, and international cooperation and development. International collaboration is central to much of the work of EuroGeoSurveys to build strategic partnerships, to build our scientific networks, and indeed to improve our science through collaboration and knowledge sharing. That includes projects in Africa in partnership with the Organisation of African Geological Surveys. It includes our active membership of the World Community of Geological Surveys, where EuroGeoSurveys will host the Activities Committee for 2023 and 2024. It includes our status as cooperating country of the Coordinating Committee for Geoscience Programs in East and Southeast Asia, CCOP. And of course it includes our close relationship with ASME, most recently through active engagement between our expert groups, and notably last month through joint engagement on the Policy Dialogues event in Chile, in which ASME and EGS, together with the European Commission, discussed the development of a critical raw materials map of Ibero-America. EuroGeo's contribution to this dialogue draws on years of collaborative work on EU-funded raw materials projects, including ProMine, Minerals for EU, EU-RAR, EGDI, and GeoEra, notably the GeoEra Frame project, which all now feed into and are delivered through the European Geological Data Infrastructure, EGDI, which is freely accessible online. My hope is that this will be a dialogue that leads to more engagement and to mutually beneficial joint future work between ASME and EuroGeoSurveys. Central to all of EuroGeoSurveys' activities within Europe and abroad is the commitment to delivering expert knowledge to policymakers, to industry, and to the public. Policy in particular will need to be flexible and responsive in the coming years in order to adjust to rapidly changing situations and technologies. To achieve the goal of up-to-date expert knowledge feeding into policy, the science policy interface must also be resilient and based on sound, harmonized scientific data and effective delivery of that data and knowledge in the appropriate format and in the appropriate timescale for policymakers. Bridging the science policy interface is where the concept of a geological service for Europe comes in, a service provided through the collaborative efforts of the Geological Surveys of Europe, providing the diverse data and expertise on the European subsurface that is embodied in the Geological Surveys of Europe and the EuroGeoSurveys expert groups. This concept already practically exists as a 5-year project coordinated by EuroGeoSurveys with 48 partner organisations, mainly but not solely represented by the Geological Surveys of Europe. Central to the Geological Service for Europe concept is the continuing development of the European Geological Data Infrastructure, which remains central to EuroGeoSurveys and to the Geological Service for Europe project, and is the outlet for all of the data gathered not just through this project, but more generally harvested from the Geological Surveys of Europe as they gather and harmonise new data and knowledge that can inform our use and our protection of the European subsurface. But it's important to note that the Geological Service for Europe project is just that, a 5-year project. In contrast, the needs of the European Union are ongoing in regard to understanding the overlapping uses of the subsurface and our need not only to use but to protect subsurface resources. It will be necessary for EuroGeoSurveys, as it will be for surveys and survey organisations around the world, to continue to provide science-based knowledge and expertise to inform policies on an ongoing basis into the future. For that reason, EuroGeoSurveys is aiming to establish a framework in which such a geological service for Europe can be sustainably funded and continue to directly serve these policy needs into the future. Thank you very much for your attention.